will try to address this question. What can modern self-supervised learning algorithms learn from human-like visual and multimodal experience? And I hope to be able to convince you by the end of the talk that we can learn quite a lot from human-like visual and multimodal experience just by applying generic self-supervised learning algorithms. And to illustrate this point, I will talk about two case studies. So the first one will involve visually grounded word learning, and the second case study will involve learning high-level visual representations from child headcam data. So time permitting, I also, in the second part of the talk, I want to talk about the question of data efficiency. So you often hear it claimed that modern machine learning algorithms are much less data efficient than humans. So in this part of the talk, I will describe an experiment that tests in a quantitative and rigorous way whether this claim is actually true, whether these algorithms are less data efficient than humans. And the answer here may surprise you. Okay, so as you all know, modern machine learning models have amazing capabilities, but these models are often trained with very unhuman-like data. So for example, in the visual domain, it's not uncommon for these models to be trained with hundreds of millions, sometimes even billions of pictures downloaded from the internet, and sometimes they even use some auxiliary site information, such as segmentation masks in this example. Whereas on the other hand, humans, whatever visual and cognitive capabilities they acquire during their early development, they do it just from just a few years of egocentric, temporally extended video stream, plus of course experience from other modalities such as audio, haptic experience, and proprioceptive experience as well. So this discrepancy between these two data sources immediately raises the question, what can these modern self-supervised learning algorithms learn from more human-like visual and multimodal experience? So if you were to give these algorithms the same type of data that humans learn from, what would they be able to learn exactly? Would it be a complete failure, or would it work as well as any other type of data? So over the last couple of years, my colleagues and I have been interested in understanding this question, and our motivation for our interest in this question is basically twofold. So the first one is sort of more practical. So we want to be able to understand the limits of current self-supervised learning algorithms. So to understand whether they can work quite generally with different types of data distributions, or do they require these like very large scale, internet scale, very large, rich data sets in order to acquire their capabilities? And the second motivation is more related to cognitive science. And so, as you may know, there's this long-standing debate in cognitive science about the origin of our perceptual and cognitive capabilities. Because these modern machine learning algorithms are extremely generic algorithms that don't bake in a lot of innate prior structure, by applying these algorithms to sort of human-like visual and multimodal experience, we hope to be able to learn something about this nature versus nurture question as well. So just to give an example, this is not something that I talk about, but for example, psychologists have claimed that something like object permanence, so understanding that objects continue to persist behind uploaders, requires innate knowledge. So this is something that's sort of hardwired in children. But if we can show that by just applying sort of generic self-supervised learning algorithms to sort of human-like video data, so something like object permanence automatically emerges, which suggests that maybe it doesn't have to be sort of hardwired. It can be sort of easily learned from human-like visual experience, but just through generic self-supervised learning. So yeah, we want to be able to say something about this nature versus nurture question with respect to particular perceptual capabilities as well. So that's our second motivation. So next I want to talk about the particular data set that we used as our proxy for human-like visual and multimodal experience. And so we use a data set called SACAM for this purpose. So this is a really cool data set collected by Jessica Sullivan at Skidmore College and her colleagues. So the so this is a large data set of headcam recordings from 3 children, abbreviated S, A, and Y, over a 2-year period in their early development. So roughly between the ages of 6 to 32 months. Sorry, it's not supposed to do that. So we have roughly 200 hours of video from one of the babies from S, and 140 hours each from A and Y from the other 2 babies. And so we have roughly slightly less than 500 hours of video in total. So the way this works is that each week the child wears the headcam for a couple of hours. And then they just record whatever they happen to be doing at the time. So there are no instructions, basically. They're not instructed to record particular episodes. So, and it's supposed to be sort of a representative sample of the visual and audio experiences auditory experiences of these children during this period. Okay, so the data set is audiovisual, as I said, and we have 61 hours of transcribed speech from the recordings of one of the babies. And we're going to use this subset, this 61 hours of transcribed video for the first project that I'll talk about. And we typically sample the videos at 5 frames per second. So this results in roughly 8.5 million frames for the entire data set. And I just want to show you an example of a short clip from this data set, just to give you a sense of what this data set looks like. Okay, so that was just a short clip from this data set. Okay, I want to move on to the first sort of case study, which is about visually grounded word learning. And I just want to acknowledge my collaborators here. So this work was led by Wei Kim at NYU, and Wen-Ta Wang, Brendan Lake, and myself contributed to this work. So as I mentioned before, we have 61 hours of transcribed video from one of the babies. So these are transcribed by human annotators, so it's high quality annotations, high quality transcriptions, and so this shows just a example sequence of frames with the corresponding utterances that were produced around those frames, and sometimes the utterances relate to what's happening in the visual scene at that time, but a lot of the times the utterances are not really particularly related to what's going on in the scene. So the correspondence is quite a bit looser than what you would expect from, for example, in these common internet scale image text data sets. But by exploiting this sort of imperfect correspondence between the utterances and the visual scenes, we hope to be able to learn something about the reference of at least some simple nouns, simple words. So that's the goal of this project, basically. So to understand to what extent we can learn the reference of some simple words by exploring this, just these simple correspondences between the visual scenes and the linguistic utterances. So we use the CLIP algorithm for this purpose. I won't have time to go into the details of how this works, but this is a technically sophisticated audience. Probably people are already familiar with this algorithm. Just to say that maybe this is a sort of very generic self-supervised learning algorithm to learn multimodal self-supervised representations. Once we train our CLIP model on the 61 hours of transcribed video data, we evaluated using this four-way classification task that we came up with. And the way this task works is that, so in each trial, we pick a particular concept. So in this example, for example, ball, and we give the model for different images. One of the images belong to the target category, and the other images belong to other distractor categories. And then we compare the sort of linguistic representation, linguistic embedding of this concept with the visual embeddings from these images, and then pick the one that gives rise to the highest cosine similarity between the visual embedding and the linguistic embedding. And if that happens to be the correct category, if that happens to be the target category, then that counts as a correct response. Otherwise, it's an incorrect response. So it's a very simple sort of four-way classification task, and this is completely zero shot. So the model is not sort of fine-tuned on these examples. And we have two different versions of this task. One uses what we call within distribution stimuli that come from the same baby, but it's a non-overlapping subset of data that wasn't used during CLIP training. And these frames are manually labeled by human annotators with respect to the visual category in the image. And the other version of this task that we use is uses out of distribution stimuli. And these are completely novel types of images. So as you can see, these are the cropped centered images with white against a white background. And we have a larger vocabulary as well in this second task. But otherwise, it's exactly the same task. Now we can look at the results first on the within distribution task. So the y-axis here shows the classification accuracy. Since there are four choices, the chance baseline is 25%. And we have a bunch of different reference models that we compare our model against. So the first one is this supervised baseline that's trained with what we call the gold labels or the ground truth labels that just uses those manual annotations, manual labels without any sort of clip training. And this model does above 80% in this task. So you can think of this as a sort of supervised baseline. The second model that we compare against is the OpenAI CLIP model. This is a CLIP model trained on a very large and rich set of image text pairs from the internet. And this model does roughly 67% in this task. And the CLIP model trained on SACAM, on the other hand, is slightly worse than that, but it's actually pretty close to the OpenAI CLIP baseline. So which suggests that this model was able to learn quite a lot about the reference of the words involved in this particular within distribution task. So here's a breakdown of the accuracy into those 22 categories in this within distribution task. And as you can see, except for the like a handful of categories at the bottom row here, the model was above chance for most of the categories. So suggesting that it was able to learn something about the reference of most of these words just by exploiting the correspondence between the utterances and the video frames. For the out of distribution task, so we had 64 categories, 64 words. And we have again the OpenAI clip baseline and the sort of supervised baseline. So they both do above 90% in the out of distribution task. They perform pretty well. So the clip model trained on SECAM, on the other hand, although it's above chance, there's a sort of substantial gap between these reference models and the clip model trained on SECAM in this case. And these black dots are the breakdown of accuracy into different categories. And as you can see, for a sort of bunch of categories here, it does pretty well. But then for a lot of these other categories, it doesn't seem to do particularly well. And for some of these categories, it's even sort of below chance. It performs below chance. So we can discuss why that is, but that's what we find. That is, I just want to give a couple of show you a couple of qualitative examples of what kind of examples the model is able to do well on, and some sort of failure cases. So on the left here, you see some examples from the training set of 4 different categories: butterfly, bucket, button, and spoon. And then on the right are examples from the out of distribution generalization task. And the numbers below each image show the accuracy when that particular image was the target image in the task. There's variation in performance across both different categories and within each category. So the model is able to perform well on particular examples as opposed to others. So butterfly category is happens to be one of the top categories. I think it's the third best top category. I think that's because for some reason there was actually a lot of examples from this particular category in the training set, and so the model was able to do pretty well on that category, and but less so in something like, for example, the spoon category. And again, we have some sort of hypotheses about why the model performs well in some categories versus others, but I will skip those details and I want to move on to just to summarize this first part. I hope that I was able to show you that visual reference of many simple nouns are learnable from a pretty small sample, just 61 hours of the multimodal experiences of a child during early development. But at least with this data set, out of distribution generalization remains challenging. And we're currently working on trying to understand how we can improve out of distribution generalization. Okay, then I want to move on to the second project that involves learning high-level visual representations from SECAM. In this part, we basically apply state-of-the-art visual self-supervised representation learning algorithms on SECAM, and then evaluate those representations in lots of downstream tasks. So we train 2 different types of models. The first one is image embedding type models. So these are visual self-supervised representation learning algorithms like Dino or masked autoencoders. trained on SACAM. And we tried lots of different algorithms and different architectures like VITs and ResNex. But for our particular data, it turns out these self-distillation type algorithms, for example, Dyno with applied to the VIT architecture works best. So that's what I'm going to talk about mostly for the results. So here you see an illustration of sort of self-distillation type self-supervised learning algorithm here. So you take a frame from SACAM, you generate two different views of the of that frame, and then you try to match the representations, high-level representations of those two views, since they're sort of semantically related to each other. And then this way you sort of learn high-level visual representation, semantically meaningful representations from these video frames. So once we train our models with data from SACAM, we evaluate them on a large number of downstream tasks involving both recognition tasks and segmentation tasks. And these tasks evaluate sort of different aspects of what it means to be a good visual representation. So for example, they evaluate scene recognition performance or robustness against different types of transformations, or robustness against background changes in background, things like that. And we also train sort of generative models as well. So we use VQG and GPT type algorithm for this case. I won't have time to delve too much into the details, but probably this is again a very standard algorithm and people are probably familiar with it. We've basically the way it works is that you first learn a discrete dictionary to encode the images, and then you just apply a standard autoregressive GPT type model on top of those discrete tokens. And then again, once we train these models on SACAM, we evaluate them by either conditional or unconditional generation tasks. And we evaluate them both quantitatively and as well as qualitatively. Okay, so and all of these models are sort of open sourced, publicly available from this address. Just want to give us sort of, I won't have time to go into the details of the particular tasks, but I just want to give a sort of overall quantitative summary for the embedding models. So as I mentioned before, VIT models trained on Dyno were the best performing models in our case. So we'll focus on those examples. So this plot shows the average accuracy across those 9 downstream evaluation tasks that I mentioned. The models on the left here are the models trained on SACAM, either on the entire SACAM dataset or individual babies in SACAM, S, A, and Y. And we have a bunch of reference models that we compare against. So first of all, we train models using the same algorithm and the same architecture on the ImageNet dataset. So it turns out that ImageNet trained models are the best performing models in our case. So we normalized everything with respect to that model. So 100% here means that the model performs as well as the ImageNet trained model. And you can see that all of these SACAM trained models are at roughly 65 to 70% of an ImageNet trained model. Which is sort of surprisingly good when you think about it. So this is just a few hundred hours of quite noisy headcam data from these children, and they already can capture up to 70% of the performance of a high performance ImageNet trained model in a bunch of downstream tasks. We also train models on other video data sets. So we particularly tried Ego4D and kinetics. Ego4D is another sort of headcam dataset, egocentric headcam dataset. But unlike SACAM, so it is collected from adult camera wearers, so they're not children, and it's not longitudinal. So it contains many more individuals than SACAM. And kinetics has even more different spatiotemporal characteristics than both EGO4D and SACAM. So as you may know, these are very short action-oriented YouTube clips, typically like less than 10 seconds long. So it has a much shorter time scale than either EGO4D or SACAM. So in order to control for the sort of the amount of data, we for both EGO4D and kinetics, we pick 200-hour subsets of these data sets and then train on those subsets. So just to sort of tease apart the effect of just the spatiotemporal characteristics of these video data sets, not the the sheer size of the data sets. And surprisingly, you find that models trained on these video datasets perform similarly to SACAM trained models, despite these qualitatively different characteristics of these video datasets. And then we also train models on subsets of ImageNet, just to sort of establish a correspondence between ImageNet and for example SACAM trained models, and we find that SACAM trained models perform more similarly to models trained on roughly 10% of ImageNet. So you can establish like a rough correspondence equivalence like that. So a few hundred hours of child headcam data seems to be like roughly equivalent to about 100,000 images from ImageNet in terms of like information content, basically. And the last one here is the random untrained model, which performs significantly worse than all of these trained models, suggesting that you really need to learn representations from data in order to perform well in these evaluation tasks. Okay, so these are the two takeaways. SACAM trained models are perform at 65 to 70% of a high quality ImageNet trained model. And the second one is that models trained on video perform surprisingly similarly, despite qualitative differences in both content and style. So I just want to give you also show these qualitative results, just to give you a sort of more intuitive sense as to what these models, SACAM trained models, can learn. We can learn emergent semantic localization without any location supervision. So we can learn these semantic localizers just by using a small amount of labeled examples, but without any sort of location supervision like segmentation masks or detection mask. So this basically uses something like a class activation map algorithm, if you're familiar with that. So a very simple idea, but it works sort of surprisingly well. So you can see an example, some examples from the basket category here. And then also some examples from the car category. It's not always perfect, but it usually works sort of surprisingly well. And then some other examples from other categories. Okay, another qualitative results that I want to mention is, so if you look at the embeddings from the embedding spaces of these models trained on SACAM, there's a lot of semantic structure. We find a lot of very rich semantic structure. So this shows an example from ImageNet. So these are mean embeddings of 1,000 ImageNet classes. So each dot corresponds to a single ImageNet class, and we highlight some of those categories by this superordinate category according to the WordNet hierarchy, you can see, for example, that there's a sort of animate versus inanimate structure that automatically emerges in these embeddings. So the ones on the left are sort of animate categories, and the ones on the right are inanimate categories. So food is seems somewhere in between. Somewhat unfortunate as a vegan myself, but you can see, for example, reptiles are clustered at the top left here. Insects are next to them, and so there's this like clear semantic grouping of the uh, categories. And what is remarkable is that this sort of emerges completely unsupervised way. So this just um, um, this was a model just trained in an completely self-supervised way on data from headcam data from one of the children. It didn't see any sort of ImageNet images. It didn't see anything remotely similar, actually. But despite that, so it sort of this kind of rich semantic structure automatically emerges in this embedding space. So this was sort of quite surprising to us. And finally, I also want to show some examples from the generative models that we trained on SACAM. So these are some unconditional samples from a model trained on, I think, all of SACAM, all 3 babies. And again, you can see there's a lot of sort of meaningful structure. It is able to generate plausible looking pictures that are similar in content to the video frames from SACAM. So sometimes like it generates sort of like weird looking images, like for example here in this case there's a lot of faces in the generated samples because faces are quite common in this data set. And then I also want to show some conditional samples as well. So in these examples, so we give the upper half of each image as context to the model, and then we ask the model to generate the lower half. And different rows are sort of different samples generated by the model. So, and you can see that in a lot of cases, it can generate sort of pretty plausible continuations. But it's not very good at sort of generating visual details. If you, for example, look at this sort of teddy bear, although it can generate, for example, the color of the object successfully, and maybe like even like the rough shape of the object, the sort of visual details are just not there. So those seem to be difficult to generate for this model. Or yeah, you can see a sort of similar thing with the baby doll example here. So yeah, the visual details are not quite convincing, but it can often generate, for example, the coarse properties of the objects, like the rough outline, orientation, or like the color of the object pretty well. Okay, so and these are some other examples. Okay, so just to summarize the second part. I hope that I was able to show that we can learn a surprising amount of visual knowledge from developmentally realistic human-like visual data, but just applying generic modern self-supervised learning algorithms. So I think I don't have a lot of time left. So in the interest of time, I want to skip this last part and just move on to the conclusions. Conclusions. Modern self-supervised learning algorithms are quite powerful. I hope that I was able to show you that they can learn a surprising amount of knowledge from a relatively small amount of developmentally realistic human-like visual and multimodal experience. All of these results were based on just a few hundred hours of child headcam data. So it's really small amount of data when you think about it. I didn't get to talk about this, but in the last part, I was going to show you that they may even match the data efficiency of humans with respect to particular visual capabilities, for example, visual object recognition. And finally, so these algorithms will obviously improve. The hardware will also improve in the coming years. So will our ability to train bigger models on more and richer sources of data. So you should really think of all of these results as a sort of like a lower bound of what we can learn from this kind of data. So I'm really optimistic about what more we can learn from this type of data by just using very powerful generic self-supervised learning algorithms. Okay, so with that, want to thank you for your attention. You can go to my webpage to sort of, this is all published work, so you can, if you're interested in the details, you can check out my webpage where you can find the links to all of these works as well as some of my other works. And also feel free to just email me with your questions or comments. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, so if anyone has any questions, I think you can come over here and ask Emin directly. Yeah. John, you have a question? Yeah, please.
So very nice talk, thank you. So my question is about the first part where some of the objects are not very accurately learned. So the model is processing frames independently, right? It may be that it misses out on the object for one frame, but maybe a bit later it gets it. So I was just wondering whether part of the results are because the camera doesn't have can't see a large fraction of the scene. It's like a small field of view, right? And also maybe because you're doing frame level, maybe if you did a bit of video level, it would have like a temporal context that would capture the object. So when the text appears, maybe the object is not in the view, but a second later is, so either a video model or a bigger field of view could help and change the results quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the lead author, we can try a bunch of different things along those lines, but it didn't seem to affect the results very much, if I recall correctly. So he, for example, took, like, for example, the mean embedding as opposed to like taking a single frame. Like you take a bunch of frames and then you take their embeddings and then take their mean. So he did something like that, but like those kinds of details were not very important. Like the results were not very sensitive to those kinds of details, if I recall correctly. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just repeating the question. So,
Okay.
someone asked me, what is the age of the child? Like, how did you choose the age of the child and why? Right? Okay. And then what was the second one? Yeah, she also is curious about the different stages of the child, development and as the video was recorded and so on. So yeah.
Yeah. So they were all the age range was consistent across the children. So it's between 6 months to 31, 32 months. And the reason for that is so I think it would be like younger than children, like babies younger than that 6 months old would be challenging in terms of like practicality. It would be difficult to use headcams with younger babies, and there's also like a lot of like experimental work from like 6 months on, and developmental psychology work from six months on. I think that was one consideration for this particular age range. So what was the other question again?
I think it was about the visual development, as the age progresses. So how does it change? Am I right? Yeah. How does the visual development, how is the visual things developing across, as the age progresses?
Yeah, we didn't really look into that question. So yeah, I guess we could address it by, for example, training different models on different time points or like at different period intervals during that time. So we didn't really look into that in detail. But I know that there was a recent paper from another group that did something like that, and they found an interesting sort of curriculum effect. So if you train like starting from early data to later data, that seems to work better than the other way around, or just like doing like random ordering. So which sort of suggests that there's some sort of like a I think they were claiming that there's some sort of like a curriculum effect going on with the earlier parts of the data giving rise to like somewhat more like simpler data in some sense, like in terms of statistics, I guess. Whereas like the later parts of the data being like more complicated, maybe like because of the way the child moves or something like that. Yeah, I think these are interesting questions, but we didn't. So that was not really our focus. So we were like more interested in this question of like the overall learnability question. So given like roughly 2 years of data from a child, what are some of the things that we can learn? So that was more like the focus of the question. But yeah, I agree that like these are sort of interesting questions.
Does that answer? Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Emin. It was a great talk.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And yeah, you're welcome to stay as well.
Oh,
The final talk will be about some open questions and really like talking about new interesting directions or open research directions by UK. So yeah, please.
Oops. All right, I'll keep it very brief. As a conclusion, sort of I've been taking a few notes from the talks we've had at this tutorial, and I think some of the key takeaways from the SSLBiG tutorial or the forum that I think pretty much everyone told you and got really excited about what lies beyond images, and we can get inspired from older papers and also developmental psychology. And videos can even be used to train competitive models. And of course, for generative AI, they're exactly at the frontier of where current research happens in industry and academia. And training more naturally also has many, many open challenges, which are just ripe for new research, especially for academics. So overall, the main takeaway is this. So let's do this. And yeah, let's do this. We're a community here. So let's get our hands dirty and do some research. Thanks.